Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. Looks like I've got a few of you with me already. Let me bring up the comments here. So I'm going to try to do this once per month, and this is the monthly Q&A. So as the channel gets a little bit bigger, and I know that talking about a channel with only 1,500 subscribers doesn't seem like a lot, especially compared to the size of a lot of the channels out there. However, I still am a full-time working photographer, and so as it starts to get bigger, sometimes I'm not as punctual with following up with the comments and the questions on the channel, or sometimes the comments and the questions are such that I think they deserve kind of a better answer than what I can just peck out on my keyboard very quickly. See, I only do this because I enjoy helping people, because I like giving back. I have yet to really make anything off of YouTube other than, a little bit of the AdSense money. So, the only reason I really do this is to help people. And sometimes there are questions that get posed that are not only deserving of a longer answer from me, but if I present them in a context such as this, where other people are watching, you guys can all contribute to this too, to this conversation, and there could be some real value for people in that. So I'm going to bring up a lot of the recent comments on the channel here, and I'll go ahead and go through some of these, just kind of a scatter shot of them. It'll give some more time for some people to join in on the stream here, and then we'll get to chatting about things. So thank you for the several of you who are joining me so far. Let me know if my audio sounds okay and where you're tuning in from here. These questions, for those of you, if you don't know who I am, this is the first time seeing me, my name is Brian Roberts. I am a full-time, mostly real estate photographer. I also do a little bit of video production, uh, a little bit of other types of commercial photography, but mostly what I shoot is real estate. I am in the San Francisco Bay Area, which means mostly what I shoot in real estate tends to be some of the pricier stuff. So let me answer some of the questions and comments here. First one was on the two lens loadout, the Sony and Canon. Okay, Devin71, thanks for the info, my pleasure. Let's see. Here's a good one. Oh, same person, Devin71, on one of the 3 tips to make a real estate photography fortune in 2023. In that video I did. Thank you for your video. As a newbie, I just bought my first camera, a Sony A7 II, and I'm excited to get in this field. Thanks again. Well, thanks, Devin. Yeah, the A7 II is a good camera. And here's the thing: the A7 II is the differentiation between the A7 II and, let's say, the A7 III, because the A7 III is the one that put Sony on the map in the modern sense, right? With the mirror. That's when they started around the A7 III time too, around 2018, when they started really developing a lot of great lenses as well, like the 1635 G Master, which is the one that I use is my daily real estate workhorse lens. That I think was around 2018 or so, around when the development of the A7 III was. A7 II is it's a lot like the A7R2 to the A7R3. I think it's the same sensor. I might be wrong about that as the A7 III. I believe it is the weaker battery, which I don't know for sure, but I'm thinking can be circumvented by a battery grip for that generation of camera. Other than that, for real estate photography, as far as I know, it's going to be the same as the A7 III. I think the flash sync speed is the same on it. We are not using autofocus heavily with real estate photography, other than to take detail shots pointing the camera at static things, like faucets and things like that. So that's a great camera. It's full frame. You're going to be able to use all the great E-mount glass on it. So I think you're really going to like the A7 II. I think that's a good choice. Even here, 6, 7 years later, whatever, since that camera has been developed, it's still a good choice for real estate photography. Okay, Hugh Barimento. Sorry if I butchered your name, Hugh. On the same, oh no, on the A7 IV, that crop video, that's where we talked about the A7 IV, the crop that it has in 4K 60. I do have some other content about that too, if anybody's interested in the A7 IV for real estate video. I have an A7 IV. I tried it for video with the 12 millimeter Zeiss to it lens to give myself that approximate 18 millimeter perspective. I was not a big fan of the A7 IV for real estate video. The Sony cameras, all of them, down low when you're shooting video, are noisy. And it's not so much that the amount of noise is problematic, but it is that the type of noise is problematic. Let me jump back to what I was doing here too. Okay, Isaac, hello. I just want to make sure that my feed is getting out, so it looks like it is. Okay, so I will jump back over to the comments here and finish what I was saying about this. So yeah, even the A7S III, which is my workhorse real estate video camera, you really want to stay at the base ISOs, and so 640 and S-Log3, and then if you have to go up to 12,800, go from 640 to 12,800, or at the very most, go from ISO 1000 to 12,800, because over ISO 1000 about in the A7S III, you start having problematic noise. And it's like I said, it's not the amount of noise, it's the type of noise. It's big color blotches, a bunch of chroma noise. Um, Denoising softwares are going to be able to correct that and clean it up, but it's going to soften your image way too much. And it's because it's a random pattern chroma noise, and so the denoising software has really no other play but to kind of just soften everything around it, to get rid of that noise. So I digress. How'd I get off on that? Oh, the 4K 60 crop. And Dice, do you always edit your shoots, or do you send your edits to editors? That was I did like a time lapse editing thing. The answer is a little bit of both. And so for my stills photography, I have been using outsourced editors for the past 2 or 3 years. And the way that I do it though is kind of a hybrid approach. And so within a typical real estate photography job, I'm going to have a mix of single exposure shots, which are typically going to be the outside shots, so the front elevation shot, all the shots around the home, around the property, any kind of amenities that the community might have. If I'm doing like a condominium, there's typically a pool or a gym or something like that. I'll do most of those single exposure, and I'll also do detail shot single exposure. So I'll do things like I shoot a lot of like house numbers and faucets and flowers, for the landscaping and stuff like that, and I like to I like to include those because it really it helps set my photography apart from especially the lesser expensive HDR houses. So like the F8s of the world and such that are out there, where they're shooting houses for $100. Those photographers don't do stuff like that because they can't afford to. They're only making $100. If you're only making $100 going out and working, then you're not going to want to spend a lot of time either on site or on the back end. And so they're typically not including things like that. And so that's the reason why I include those shots. And the single exposure shots I will edit myself because they don't take a lot of time. So when we get into the interiors, that is where I'm doing flash ambient composites. And there's no like set formula that I'm doing with this. Sometimes it's only 2 layers because sometimes 2 layers is all I need. I will use a flash layer for both the window exposure and for the known source color temperature of the strobe that the editor can use to clean up colors against, and then just one ambient shot if my windows aren't blowing too bad, that the editor can use to fall off the shadows with, and light directionality and stuff like that. Sometimes I will, and often, my play for that is I will bracket ambient exposures, and that's really more to give the editors choice on how to control window bloom, right? So if you have a window blow and nuclear light in, and you bracket that, the bloom around the edge of the window is going to become more or less depending on what your shutter speed is, right? So just to give the editor that choice, so they can go ahead and composite in the clean window shot that my flash layer is going to. That's why I'll composite those sometimes. So the answer is I outsource my composites editing because that takes the most time. You know, I always advise that people do their editing themselves for a while first before you get to that point. And it's really for a couple reasons. One of them is you get to learn what you get to learn how to shoot for the edit. And that's really something that can't be overstated because when you're doing all of your editing yourself, you then begin to understand what types of things the editors are looking, like I said, like with the window bloom. It's like I wouldn't have even known that was a problem, or it could be problematic had I not done my composites editing myself for a couple years before I started outsourcing that. And the second reason is it probably doesn't make business sense right away to outsource your composites editing because when you first get started in this, your schedule isn't going to be, I don't think, your schedule is not going to be so dense that you can't do it yourself. And when you get to doing it yourself, it's going to take you forever the first few times, right? But you get better at it and you get to learn how better to shoot on site for the edit. And all of that is going to be a great thing to know going forward. So let's see. So let's see. It looks like I got 6 people watching. Got a couple comments. I'm going to go a couple more comments that have been left on the channel here, and then we'll start chatting here. So I'd like to see your workflow, Master Troll. I love that guy's screen name. Master Troll says, I'd like to see your workflow. That's on the Watch Me Edit a Complete Real Estate video in 20 seconds. Well, you did. You might want to slow it down a little bit, though. But that's what you're seeing. You're seeing me edit the single exposure stuff. So the detail shots, and then what happens is when I get the composites back from my editors, which is typically depends on how much I want to pay, right? But it's usually 12 to 18 hours later. I'll get those composites back for the flash ambient composites for the inside. And then I will then sit down and edit all the single exposures and make a final pass at the composites I get back just to tweak it, to make it consistent with my look. Okay. King Truck Gaming and Canon R8. Is this the perfect real estate camera? So this is the last live stream that I did about the Canon R8, and I think the Canon R8 is going to be a fantastic real estate camera. I really do. I mean, for $1,500 or whatever the thing is, it's full frame. Canon did a lot with the R8 versus the R6 II that they did. It reminds me of when they made the EOS R and then the RP. The RP is not a lesser camera than the EOS R in any way that matters to a final deliverable, right? So it has the same sensor, same dynamic range. So, all that stuff is the same. The image is the same with the EOS R and the EOS RP. Same thing is true, I think, with the R6 Mark II and the R8. You can spend $1,000 less, get the R8, have, as far as the delivered image is concerned, the same capability with the R8 as you do the R6 II. R6 II adds the bells and whistles, right? It gives you another card slot, I think, and what else does it give you? A bigger battery, I think, maybe, and it gives you niceties. For real estate photography, all of those things are circumventable. They really are. So I think the R8 is going to be a fantastic real estate camera once we get them out there in the wild and people start using them. Okay, Danny Oblakov. Sorry, Danny, if I butchered your your name there. You looked much more clear with EV Mux in your previous stream. So for those of you paying attention, so I have been doing these live streams, kind of bouncing back and forth between EV Mux as a software and StreamYard. This time I'm doing EV Mux. I am using an A10 mini switcher, and I am throttling the connection because my upload speed isn't great. It's kind of just what's available in my area. I already pay for the fastest internet, and it's not great for streaming. So, and I live in a very populated place in California, so go figure, right? It's all the contractual stuff with all these providers. Okay, Ida Raystream. New Canon cinema camera is coming. So that was when I was discussing the C200s, which is what I'm filming on right now. And I think a new Canon cinema camera is coming. And the reason I think that is because the C200s, all the C200 SKUs are on super uber blowout. I got a pair of C200Bs for $2,500 a piece, brand new. That is a whole lot of camera for $2,500, and I am happy as a clam with them too. By the way, I think they're great for this, like what I'm doing right here, where you can just leave the thing on. It goes for hours and hours. It's got face only autofocus. It's got XLRs in. I mean, they're perfect for this kind of thing that I'm doing right here. Now, if only I can get my connection speed not to be to be able to present the quality that it's capable of, but that's not the C200's problem. Okay, so Ida said, what did Ida say? Fashion photographer, cinematographer in Turkey, and I am owner of a C200 because important for my work is the first 15 stops of dynamic range and the 12-bit footage for my post-production in DaVinci Resolve. I tested last week the Red Komodo 6K, but forget it. It's a joke. Okay, C200, great cam. I do not agree that the Komodo is a joke. I shot Komodo for a couple years. I recently sold Komodo. The reason that I sold Komodo, though, has absolutely nothing to do with the image or the flexibility of the R3D IPP2 engine for post-processing. In fact, I think that's kind of crazy talk, to say that that's not superior to C200 footage or any Canon footage for that matter. I mean, that is Red's biggest strength and biggest selling point is the robustness and the depth of that codec, and that you can get the robustness and the depth of that codec for only $6,000 and have it even be in 6K. That's super attractive and super appealing to a lot of people, and that's why they buy Red Komodos. Red Komodo ultimately was not going to be for me going forward for the simple fact that I am a one-man band primarily. And when I do video production work, when I'm not a one-man band, it's typically only with one or two other people. Komodo is more difficult to use as a one-man band. Not impossible. I mean, I did for a couple of years, But, there are things that cameras like C200, for instance, have on board. It's got built-in NDs. It's got XLRs with the preamps that sound pretty good even. It's got a face-only autofocus that really works, and Komodo's autofocus, it does things nowadays, but it's not as good. So those types of things, just the workflow types of things, are what keeps me out of Komodo. Um, if Komodo had a real audio solution on board, because the preamps are no good in Komodo. It's got a 3.5 millimeter jack in. You are recording external audio on Komodo and you're syncing them together in post. But if Komodo had inboard audio that was any good, if Komodo had built-in NDs, if Komodo had, and this is a big one for me, autofocus that I can trust. As a one-man band, if I'm doing, say, an interview, a multicam interview, I want to be able to trust that I can set up a B cam on like a slider or something and tell it only to hit the face of the subject here. With a C200, I can absolutely do that and absolutely trust it. It's the face only autofocus I'm using now. You won't see it jump to the background ever. It just doesn't. Okay. Komodo, even with the face detect autofocus that it has now, when it loses the face, it wigs. And it racks hard, it racks back for, it's looking for a face. So it, racks back and forth. Um, I have no doubt that Red will figure this out, because Red's just one of those companies that is really good at figuring stuff out. But right now it's not ready for prime time. I might get a Komodo again at some point, but right now not so much. So let's get into some of the comments here on the live chat. So Isaac, hello. Here, let me bring you up here. Okay. Isaac, hello. Hello, Isaac. How are you? Where are you coming to us from this afternoon? And let's see. La Caraja. It is not a photography related question, but this is my first time using a double ISO camera, Canon R5C. If I set the base ISO to 800, why do I get another ISO to set on the menu? That's a good question. That is something that let me take a drink here before I answer that. That's a question that I had with the R5C at first too. Um, so with what you're describing as dual native ISO cameras, and with dual native ISO video cameras, there are more than one implementation on how to do this. So let me answer your question by first telling you how the Blackmagic cameras do it. So the Blackmagic is dual native ISO, just like the R5C, and I think it's at the same spots too. It's at 1,000 and then at 3,200. And what Blackmagic does is when you are shooting, you can choose either to be at that first native ISO or the second native ISO. So if you exceed 1,000 ISO when you're shooting, you automatically go to that second base ISO of 3,200 with the Blackmagic. That's how it's encoded, even though you're only at like 1,600 or something like that, right? Then in post, with the Blackmagic camera, you cannot 1,000 ISO becomes your floor. You cannot go under 1,000 ISO if you were over 1,000 ISO when you were shooting. Same thing is true for the lower base ISO, right? If you shoot at ISO 800, you can go up to 1,000 ISO in post with the Blackmagic with the B-raw. You cannot exceed within the raw engine that 1,000 because you're at the base ISO. Okay, so that's the way Blackmagic does it. The way that Canon does it is a little bit different. And so when you choose the base ISO with Canon with ISO 800, you can then go and choose, let's say, 600, or you can go and choose 1,600. And what that is, okay, you are actually that is actually choosing ISO 600 or ISO 1,600. 800 is the base gain on the sensor, and what you are doing is you're moving middle gray, right? So if you take a look at charts out there with cameras, with video cameras, and again, going back to Blackmagic, because Blackmagic is really good at making all this information public. If you go look at Blackmagic, so like the Pocket 6K, for instance, there will be a chart somewhere on Blackmagic's site which will show you how many stops above middle gray and how many stops below middle gray that sensor and that system is able to resolve at which ISO value. Okay, so with Canon, let's say the base native ISO on the R5C is 800. If you stick with 800, okay, you're able to resolve then the most dynamic range of that camera is at 800. That's as I understand. I have one too, right? Um, that means the most amount of stops over middle gray and the most amount of stops under middle gray collectively are going to make up your 12, 13 stops of dynamic range, whatever it is. When you start going below that, you are going to increase your capacity to maintain clean shadows. It's going to be at the expense of highlights. And so you still have the same or a similar amount of stops of dynamic range, but because you are going, okay, my base ISO 800 is my sensor value. That's the gain on my sensor. And now I'm going to go and cut that in half. I'm going to go to 400. You're going to get cleaner shadows. You're going to have less noise, but your highlights are going to clip easier. Same thing's true and opposite, right? 800 is the base ISO. Let's say you go to 1200. I don't know if the R5C actually works like this, but just for the sake of example, let's say you go to 1200. Your highlights are going to be better. You're going to retain more information in the highlights before they clip, right? So as your highlights approach that white point, the knee of it is going to look a little bit softer. It's going to retain more of that information before the highlights clip. At what expense? At the expense of noisy shadows, right? And so because you're exceeding the base ISO, you're going to get more noise in the shadows, but your highlights are going to be a little bit more forgiving. You can protect them a little bit less, right? So then that's how the single native ISO works, right? With the Canon like the R5C. Now you have the 3200 gain stage, and that's basically just a second gain on the sensor, right? So it's optimized for 3200. When would you use 3200? When you have to, you know, and the same kind of thing is true. Typically, even cameras like the R5C that are dual native ISO like that still perform better at the lower gain setting than the higher gain setting. Sony A7S3 is definitely like this. You know, everybody talks about, oh, it cleans up so much when you go to 12,800, but it's getting hammered with in-camera noise reduction, you know? And if it wasn't, then you would see the noisy shadows that are present, you know, with that. So, um, yeah, but if you go to 3200, okay, that's your second base. Let's say you go to 3200 and then go down to 800, right? So it gives you that choice. 3200 is my base, and I go back down to 800. What's that going to do? I don't know. I mean, I've never done it. I don't know why I'd do it. You know, I just go at 800. But that's what it is. You know, they're giving you the base ISO, the base gain. So if you have to, with most cameras that are dual gain ISO like that, okay, if you have to go up to, let's say the R5C, let's say your perfect exposure with the R5C, you know, based on your aperture and whatever your shutter angle is going to be and everything, is at 1600 ISO. Should you be at 800 or should you be at 3200? That's where you're going to have to test. You know, 1600, I probably would go down from 32, but it depends on if there are a lot of shadows or if there are a lot of highlights. And I hope I'm explaining this okay. You know, sometimes I understand something fairly well, but I'm not particularly good at teaching it. So I hope you got something something from that, Lakaraha. But thanks for the question. It's you know, it's a really thoughtful question. Okay, Isaac, between the R8 and R7, is full frame a big difference for real estate? Yes, it is. The full frame is always a big difference for real estate, and the reason is because of it's not necessarily because the sensor's bigger, and it's not even because you can get ultra wide crop lenses, which you can, but it's more because the best lenses you're going to find out there, and the selection of lenses you're going to find out there are really tailored. They're designed to be used with full frame cameras. Um, Crop sensor lenses typically are not as good. that's just a fact. You know, especially nowadays, these manufacturers, a lot of their R&D is put into developing lenses around full frame sensor systems. So um, now the two that you said, the R8 and the R7, I'd go with the R8 for that. I think, you know, my understanding is the R7 is going to be the more feature-rich camera, because I think they're around the same price, the R8 and the R7. The R7 is a more feature-rich crop sensor camera. The R8 is the more stripped-out full-frame camera. For real estate, I will go with the full-frame stripped-out camera for two reasons. One is because there's more better full-frame glass to choose from than crop sensor glass. And the second is for real estate, the features that the R7 features above the R8, you're not really going to use much of that anyway. So those are the two reasons that I would go with the R8 over the R7. Let me get back to some of the comments left on the channel here. Okay. Carrie Hutchings stumbled onto your channel. I'm now a subscriber. Thank you, Carrie. I'm glad to have you around. Leo, what about lighting? Well, lighting's a different. So this is when I was talking about lensing with the two lens real estate photography loadout. And that's truly, I have two lenses that I use for real estate photography mostly. And so you should check that out if you haven't. What about lighting? Lighting is a completely different video. And if there's interest, let me know, guys. You know, if you'd like me to do a video on lighting, I'd be happy to. Okay, Rob Turner on that same video, two lens loadout, very well said. The balance of ease and use of creative options is a lesson that can be expensive to figure out. Each type of shoot has an optimal kit. That's true. For real estate, just do what he said. He has learned much for you. It's good to hear from those who truly know. Usually these guys are too busy shooting and teaching. Somehow he manages to do both. Thank you so much, Rob. That's an awesome comment. Yeah, I am entering my busy season, so you know I'd like to keep a good clip on the new videos going forward. But I'm a realist, you know. I know that it's kind of tough through the spring to do that. Scott Logan, this is I compared a bunch of Sony cameras on this video that he's coming on. Thanks so much for sharing your experience using the Imaging Edge mobile app with the A7 IV. Working with Imaging Edge on my A7 III has been an exercise in frustration. Sluggish shutter reactions, frequent disconnects, failed to shoot messages, and slow as molasses preview image fetching to the iPad. I've tried a few third-party alternative apps too, and they perform similarly using the A7 III. How much improved was the preview image fetching on your iOS device with the A7 IV? That is a great question, and the answer to that is it is a world improved. So the A7 III. So within the Sony lineup, you have the A7 III, the A7R3, and the A7R4. Even though it is a redesign of the R3, I still consider the same generation as the A7 III and the A7R3. And the reason I do that is because there is a clear generational jump with the Sony bodies, with starting with the A1 and then the A7 IV and now the A7R5. Those three cameras, stills cameras, I think are the new generation and current generation of Sony bodies. The A7 III, A7R3, A7R4 are in a lot of ways the old generation, even though the R4 is, you know, allegedly a redesign. And a lot of that really has to do with the usability of the cameras, and especially what we're discussing here with the Imaging Edge app, the stability of the app, the range of the app, in that how strong of a Wi-Fi signal is the camera broadcasting to that Imaging Edge app. The difference between the A7 III and the A7 IV is enormous. As far as with the A7 III, it's not as stable of a connection, and once you get a couple interior walls between you and the camera, and why would you want to do that? You know, there are reasons you want to do that, especially if you're using lights, right? So if you're using like the Godox AD200, right, and so you're shooting real estate and you're popping flashes here and there are shots where, let's say, the biggest span in a house is 40 feet, and I want to go pop a flash over there to illuminate a room that the camera can see. Um, the the range of the transmitter for the flash on top of the camera with an A7 III is way sufficient. Okay, but the A7 III itself and the Wi-Fi connection, the Wi-Fi network that it creates that you can ad hoc in on the iPad too, is just not that strong or that stable. With the A7 IV and especially the A1, that's when that got fixed. That's when the connection is pretty rock stable. So with the A7 IV, I can go easily 30 or 40 feet until I know that, okay, I might have some connection issues. With the A1, it's way further even than that. In fact, I tested this once when I had been using the A1 for a little while with the Imaging Edge app, and I was shooting a house. My van was parked somewhere that was problematic for somebody. Can you move your van? Sure, great. And I said, huh, I'm going to see what the range of this thing is. So I kept my iPad slung around my neck, went to move the van, moved it, went outside, got in the van, moved it like probably 20, 30 yards down the street. The thing was still connected. Got out of the van, walked on the sidewalk, back in the house, into the house, back to the part of the house I was shooting. It was connected the whole time. So the A1, one of the things about the A1 that really sold me on the A1 was that, was the range of the Wi-Fi connection. So, but yes, the A7 IV, A7 III, that's kind of where that generational jump happened with Sony. Is when Sony released the A1, the A1's beast at everything, but it's not a normal camera for normal people. It's $6,500 body, but the A7 IV, it's a lot like how the A7 III was the baby A9. The A7 IV is the baby A1. And you can tell the difference because I have them both. And you can tell the difference really just even with the feel of it. Like the A7 IV just doesn't feel as robustly built as the A1. It doesn't feel as solid. It's not as heavy. It's kind of plasticky feeling, whereas the A1's just like a big chungus. Um, and everything about the A1's faster. Everything's but faster, and the Wi-Fi radio is stronger. It's what you would expect for a camera that costs like what 2.5 times what the A7 IV is. But feature wise, stability wise, with the Wi-Fi radio, there's really a lot to like about the A7 IV. Okay. New Canon cinema camera is coming on that video. It'll be very interesting. This is Shutterjack. It'd be very interesting to see the new offerings that Canon is going to release soon. Will the C200 Mark II be the same price point as the C70? I don't see why it would be. If they, it's so funny these camera companies, man, because a lot of times they'll have, and Sony does this too, like with the A1 and the A9. Let's talk about that, right? So allegedly there's going to be a new A9 coming out, but what's it going to be able to do that's useful beyond what the A1 does? Like who is the new A9 going to be for? Because right now, especially now that with the A1, you can shoot compressed RAW of a few different flavors. Your typical A9 customer, so like sports shooters, um, they have A1s. So who's the A9 Mark III or whatever really for? I mean, you're gonna have to lower the price on that camera. Um, Especially if you're going to make it like the same tired 24, 26 megapixel, whatever it is, because the A1 can shoot 30 frames a second raw at 50 megapixel. I mean, it's a monster, right? So will the A1 kill a new iteration of A9? I don't know. And the same thing is true for the C200 and C70 argument. C70, in a lot of ways, is a better camera than the C200, just for no other reason that it's got the dual gain sensor, the DJO sensor that is kind of it's recording two entirely different exposures as it's running and compositing them to eke out more dynamic range. C200 doesn't do that, so the C70 sensor is way more advanced than the C200s. The C70 has an intermediate codec that the C200 does not. So the C200, what I'm shooting on right now, you can choose to shoot 12-bit RAW in C-Log 2, which is awesome. And that's the highest and best use of the C200. Or you can shoot 8-bit, which is not, right? But the C70 has a 10-bit intermediate codec. Other than that, is C70 has NDs. It's got. I mean, there are things the C200 does still better than the C70. So it has SDI outs, full size HDMI outs. It's got full size XLR ins. It has, in my opinion, better preamps, and it has more tailorability on how you can set gain stage those preamps on it. It's got buttons for everything. It has a rosette on the side of the body versus the fixed grip and the fixed grip angle. And I know that the C70 has a rosette too. But but there are things that the C200 still does better than the C70, even now. That it's like a 5-6 year old camera. If Canon does redesign a C200, it's going to be more expensive than the C70. Because I think it's going to bring what the feature set of the C200 currently is and give it the things the C70 has. I think it's going to get that sensor. I think it's going to get an intermediate codec. So you're going to have a C70, but a C70 that has all of the more production features, right? Like the SDI and the preamps and the XLRs and stuff like that on board. So looks like I've got 3 of you watching right now. So we've been on for about 43 minutes. I'm going to bring this stream to an end in case, unless anybody has any other questions, or maybe you could help me out too, just with some ideas, things that we can do going forward. I've had the few questions that I've had on the stream have been really good, especially the dual ISO one. So La Caraja, I hope let me bring that comment back up. I hope I hope I explained that well, about dual ISO. Really, the explanation for dual native ISO and how you shoot for dual native ISO and how you work with dual native ISO in post is different for all the cameras I've used that do it. So Canon's implementation is going to be a little bit different than Sony's implementation is going to be a little bit different than Blackmagic's. Red has the Gemini as dual ISO. I've never shot a Red Gemini. I used to own a Dragon X, but that was single base ISO. But it's going to be different with every camera that you have. With the R5C, you do have the ability to choose your base either at 800 or at 3200. Then you can move the ISO from there. And what that's doing is it's moving middle gray. So I encourage you to take a look at dynamic range charts. I don't know if I've seen one for an R5C, but just to kind of get the gist of what that does. Blackmagic, like I said, is very good at putting all that information out on how theirs works. So yeah, really, to put it simply, use the lower base ISO anytime you can, for any reason. Just use the lower base ISO. Once you start getting advanced enough that you can differentiate whether you need the latitude and the shadows or the highlights with your shot, and then reconciling that against the available light that you have at your disposal, then you can start coming off those base ISOs, deciding which gain stage, then you start doing, but understand how it works first with the latitude you have in the highlights and the shadows as you move that ISO point around, independent of the base gain on the sensors. So I know that's probably clear as mud. So anyway, the few of you that joined, it's good seeing you. Make sure to check out my other videos, and I will see you again soon.